Good morning, everyone. So, good news, there's no quiz today. I don't know yet, but I'll come up with something. So there seems no point to make a quiz about the presentation on last Thursday. So just one thing I wanted to mention, that when someone gives a presentation, and even though that presentation is not the one that probably you or I would have given because it was relatively content-free, and what can you say when someone says, here's this callback, here's that callback, here's that callback? It still is considered good form to try to ask some questions. So you've seen me trying to figure out a couple of things to ask. The visitor makes an effort to come here and stuff, and so it's this socially normal thing to do, to figure out what kind of questions to ask, and just spend 4 or 5 minutes asking questions. If nothing else, you can always use that as an opportunity to show how much smarter you are than everyone else in the room, and by asking something that says, from my considerable experience with this or this, I'm confused with that aspect, and that way now you've showed off that you have experience in something. So it's just something to think about with the next presentation as the presenter goes through the slides. Let's figure out a question or two to ask that's like not completely inane, but that goes a little bit further somewhere. And there's always plenty of questions to ask. And if 20 other people ask questions, then you're home free. You don't have to ask the 21st one. But it's kind of awkward for a presenter if just there's stony silence after the presentation. So it just is a kind of social tip. She did comment on that and said, seems to be an awfully quiet group. So she gives presentations everywhere, and I guess the kids at Stanford, they have this bred into them from a young age on how to do better than that. I realize social skills are not our strong suit, otherwise we'd all be in administration of justice or somewhere. But whatever, so here we are, and we have to learn it. So there'll be a presentation next Tuesday by a couple of people from Microsoft. One of them is going to talk about HTML5 and Windows. It's totally unclear to me why HTML5 is somehow Windows specific, but we'll find out. And one who's going to talk about how to do Windows Phone development, and that person is going to be the key for us to get some devices. So let's see where we're at with the projects. The group that's doing the Android client can get started really at any time. I'll set an official starting point next week, but after the Microsoft presentation. But right now, you guys can get going if you want to get a head start, and it would be a good idea if you did and self-organized yourself in some way. I guess the iPhone group is going to have to wait a little bit until we do some basic iPhone development, or you could just get started with the Android. That sounds like a reasonable thing to do, and just figure out what can you do on the Android client, what ideas can you generate, and plan your way up. We're going to be talking about HTML5 today, and that should give you enough of who was in the HTML5 group. Okay, 1, 2. That's it. Okay, number 3 is not showing up. We'll have to find out what happened. And did one of you ask me? Did you ask me to say that you wanted to be in it? Someone sent me an email and said I wanted to do the HTML5 stuff. I have already some expertise. That's you. So, and you have that expertise already?
I did with one before.
Okay. Okay, great. So I think you guys can just get going. So I've seen that that a couple of you emailed back to the fellow at UCSF about that HemePath counter app, whatever that may be, and so we need to set up a conference call. Who are the HemePath people? It's you, and you. Okay, so we need to set up a conference call, and I don't know. I could be present or not present. It's your choice.
We already talked.
Oh, you talk?
Yeah.
That's what I like to hear. Okay, great. Okay, so you guys are ready to do something? Are you going to meet with him sometime, or did he give you some pictures that make it a little clearer?
His mock-ups of what he thinks.
Yeah. What was mysterious to me is what goes on under the mock-ups. Does one have to know? Like, I would like to see some picture that shows, some bad stuff that someone taps on, and that's what was missing for me. But you might want to ask him. So did you guys kind of establish like what's the first thing he's going to see, or what's the next step?
The first thing he's going to see is a timeline from us of what we can deliver.
Okay. Okay, just copy me on these things so that I know if it's a call, then there's nothing much I can do. But I'll find out from your progress report soon enough.
Okay.
So, but that's great that you guys have taken up the initiative to just get going. Okay, who are the S-Pen people? Okay, so if I'll give you a few days to come up with, if you want to have an idea, or maybe do you already have an idea? Okay, if you could kick it on for a couple of days, but I'll tell you what I want to do because it's something that's dear to my heart, and that's the following: so I'm doing these courses. I'm developing one of these massively online open source courses with Udacity. You might have seen some of those, and where you can just enroll and take these courses for free, and you watch some videos and stuff. And so the way that they work is that instead of having just filming someone talking or just filming a bunch of PowerPoints, for them it's a big thing to have someone write. And so they show the writing develop just like it used to be in the olden days on a blackboard or whiteboard. And it is pretty effective. Check out the Python course and you'll see what I mean. So someone writes on some kind of a background. And the way that they do it right now is kind of weird, that they film your hands over a Wacom tablet, and it seems and for me to do anything, I have to go to the Macintosh that it's set up on. I have to cut and paste the snippets of stuff that I want to write on, and it's all very, very tedious to set it up. It's not been done for. I mean, it works fine if I have to give one 5-minute lecture, but I have to give like 100 of them, and it's just not set up for that kind of workflow. So what I would like to have is something where on the app, so some snippets of background can appear. So you have some background here, you have some background here, and they would progressively be revealed so that I can say, now here's the first thing I want to talk about, and then click something and the second stuff appears. And then with the pen, I want to be able to write over things. I want to be able to circle things in the usual way that one marks things up. And then it should record all of that stuff in some way. And I guess if you record on it as an MPEG video on a device, you're going to blow the storage on the thing pretty quickly. So hopefully there's some more compact way of recording it. And it does, of course, have to record the voice. But the voice shouldn't be that hard. So that would be something that I would be very interested in. And of course, I can give infinite detail as to how exactly I would want that. All right, then the CineQuest app to Windows Phone. Who is the Windows Phone people? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we will have to figure out the next Tuesday on how to get you a Windows Phone. Hopefully, all of you actually run Windows. Anyone who's you're not running Windows?
I'm not.
How did you get on this group?
I posted my thing kind of late.
I see. Well, we'll find out how you get to run Windows.
I can run it, but do we need Windows 8 for?
We'll ask him.
Okay.
I have no idea.
You need Windows 8 Pro, Windows Phone.
Really? Well, it should run in an emulator, no?
If you want an emulator, you need the Pro version.
Okay, well, we'll find out how we get all this stuff. Okay. I'm glad you know something about this. So,
Yes.
oh, great. Okay, glad to hear that. But you could run it inside VirtualBox,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we'll ask all of those questions on how we get access to the software and stuff on next Tuesday. This Thursday, I'm out of town. I'm at a conference, so you have a free day. It would be a good idea to just meet with your team and set up, the rules of engagement on how you want to divvy up the labor and what you want to do and stuff. And so, since you already have the time slot, all of you are available. You can do it here or in the library or whatever. Okay. Any other immediate questions about the project? Yeah.
So for the updates and those stuff you take for work on the projects, we'll start that.
Yeah, so I was going to have you start the next Thursday. So there's a homework that I just posted that's due next Wednesday, and then that'll kind of be your next homework assignment. Yeah, I just posted new homework about the stuff that we're going to be lecturing on today, and I figure if you have next Wednesday, that seems fair. And then on Thursday, the project start in earnest. But there's nothing wrong with getting a head start and just organizing yourselves. And if you get done earlier, no one's going to be unhappy. Other questions? Yeah.
So F10, are we gonna be able to get an F10?
Okay, so what you're going to have to do is contact the what's her name, Wei Shao, and say, now we have a project idea. Now we need loaners. What do we do about loaners?
Okay.
And without loaners, you can't do anything, right?
Yeah.
And then she said she has a couple of tablets, and it's also a good idea to already download the SDK just to see what one can do with the SDK.
Okay.
But you really do need those loaners to make any headway. And we'll have to see how many loaners she can give us. But right now we should request 3 and see what happens. Yeah.
Just to make sure, on the schedule you have that we have a midterm next Thursday.
Oh, I see. I'll move it.
Okay.
I'll move it. Yeah, I don't think there's anything sensible we can do with the midterm right now. Yeah.
Do you want Group 1 to work with Group 2? So put their device integration into our modernized.
I think that would, if you actually think you can swing that, I would be a happy camper. But my expectation was, frankly, that was too hard to coordinate. But if you want to exceed my expectations, I would be very happy. Right now, what I thought is that there would be 2 divergent things coming out of there, and then in the next class, people would pick the best of the 2 and integrate them into something that actually gets put to use. But if you find a way of making it so that integration is smoother, then that would be nice. So particularly if both of you are done much faster than I thought, that might be something that we could consider. Other questions? Okay, well, those are all good questions, so just put more questions on Piazza, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so just the weekly reports lecture. So today I'm going to talk about HTML5, and I have shamelessly adapted these notes from Dr. Pollitt's course with his permission, of course. So I'm giving the link to the original lecture so that you know where this comes from. So as you'll see, these slides are a little different than the slides that I usually have. So there's a lot of information on it. I'm not going to go through all of the stuff. You can read most of it yourself. So, so the idea of HTML5 is that it's supposed to be even more cross-platform than the existing HTML4 that we've been seeing for many years. That it has some amount of integration into the devices, for example, that it can take advantage of location information and such, that it can deal with some of the sensors. And so the idea is that nowadays HTML it integrates with JavaScript. JavaScript these days is quite fast in these browsers. And so it should be possible to write these fairly simple apps, such as that Cinequest app, completely inside JavaScript, without having to write anything that's native. And so the advantage would be cross-platform. And that means write once, run anywhere, which is clearly what we want. And for some applications, like if you have a game that needs the utmost in speed, that might not be the right thing. But for a lot of the stuff that you get, that sounds like a perfectly good thing to do. So the idea is that that these web applications, unlike the HTML4 web applications that you have nowadays, that live mostly on the on the server, and the browser just serves up the UI, that they live on the client, that the JavaScript runs on the client. The JavaScript will just refresh what one sees on the screen. And so you use JavaScript as a client-side scripting language. And that's something that is mildly supported by all of the various device vendors. And you still have to package your application, particularly on Apple, you have to package it as an app. That's the only way to get something in there. So there are a couple of wrappers, such as these PhoneGap and Sencha Touch, that do the wrapping that gives the user the illusion as if it was an app. But the programmer just creates it with JavaScript. So we're going to be using this jQuery mobile library, and you'll use the slide in the lab to have like a basic framework of a page. So the idea is that over here, we put in the JavaScript code. Over here, you see that the app has a bunch of divs. We have a header. So notice the basic HTML. Can I just have a show of hands? Who really does not know HTML? So everyone knows basic tags and stuff. That would be kind of good. Then I wouldn't have to go through the very basic things. So the one thing that looks strange here is that the data role attribute. So apparently in HTML5, you can have your own attributes, and they have to start with the word data, and then so you can have custom attributes, which you couldn't have so far. So these role attributes here have to do with this jQuery mobile library, and then they do something magical that you'll see pretty soon. So over here we put in a header, and then that thing, as you'll see in a minute, is formatted like a header on a typical mobile screen. And then the contents, you put in stuff, and we'll see soon what stuff goes in there. Then the JavaScript that one puts in here will manipulate the contents. So that way you get dynamic contents. You have to put in a whole bunch of different libraries here, so that we'll talk about where they come from. So I don't really want to say too much about HTML. If you need the refresher, you're welcome to it. Otherwise, you'll just skip right over it. We're not really. So he goes in here in CSS. I'll tell you briefly as a refresher what it is. So the idea these days when you have an HTML document is it gives the structure of what goes on. It says here is a division or here is a list or something, but it doesn't really specify what the appearance is. We're very used to one kind of appearance, right? That a bulleted list kind of looks like this. But there's no reason that a list has to appear like that. A list could just be a bunch of buttons one after another. That formatting is done by CSS, by these cascading style sheets. And so there's rules that specify how everything should be formatted. And so a rule might say that whenever you have a list that has a particular label, then it should be done with rounded corners and some background image so that it appears to look like buttons. And we don't typically create our own as programmers because it's tedious to do. We just assume that there's some artists who give us the CSS file. All right, so I'll skip over this part here right now. This is more HTML. Here's more likely where to find examples. And so here is like a typical example on how you would program a list in this style. So we have an unordered list. And that's just used for a list of buttons. Each of the items here is a list item, just as if you were making a bulleted list for a web page. Over here, you see some of these data tags. Data role equals list view. That's the one that says formatted like a list of stuff. Then I don't even know what these things are, but they are specified in the jQuery mobile documentation. Let's look at an individual item, like this one here. So it's a regular list item. By making it as an A link, it makes it clickable. If you omit the A, then the formatter is just going to put it there as an information item, but not as a clickable item. The href here is set to go back to itself. So the pound sign here means go back to the current page. And later on, we will want to put something more interesting in here. So let's see how this stuff is rendered. And here you see the rendering. So notice, like here, the rounded corners. Notice that these things were added on because of the href to indicate visually that these are clickable items. And notice there's this subtle shadowing kind of stuff here. Up here is the header formatted, like a mobile application would expect. You should think of this thing on your phone. It's going to be much scrunched together on the browser, it doesn't look right at all. And so that's what automatically gets generated when you code this stuff here. And so if we step back a little bit from someone who knows basics of HTML, this is actually pretty good, right? This is, in a way, it's more convenient than the Android stuff where you had to learn a whole new language for what the various controls were. So here you can reuse a lot of your existing knowledge. Yeah?
I want to confirm the data that inset, is that what made it with the app, the layout with the arrow?
No, but I don't know what it did.
I think like the data inset make the round corners.
Oh, that's very possible.
Yeah.
Yes, that's very.
You just expand the whole width.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so the filter thing came from one of the data filter things. And what else did we have? The list is just,
The list is,
the data role is just that makes it a list.
okay.
Yeah. So all of this stuff is actually reasonably well documented when you go to the jQuery mobile documentation. And so what I'm going to spend a little bit more time on is on understanding JavaScript. So you can do the static layout just by doing HTML, and that's not usually very difficult. But to make it an actual application that reacts to users, you have to write JavaScript. And I'm sure who of you would consider themselves, at least a basic JavaScript programmer? Okay, that's maybe a third. When I stay longer, might go up to a little more. Yeah. So that means that those of you are going to have to get a real crash course into JavaScript. And fortunately, the basics of JavaScript are pretty simple. So here's the crash course. First of all, where do you put the JavaScript? There's two places you can put it. You can put it in a separate script file, which is actually generally the better way of doing it, or you can put it right into the web page, which is what we're going to be doing today. But as soon as it gets to be kind of too large, you're much better off putting it into a separate script file. If for no other reason that then your text editor can, or your development environment can format it properly. The development environments tend to have a harder time formatting a mixture of HTML and JavaScript. So that separation tends to be cleaner. Today, we're not going to do it though. So basic things, JavaScript is just like Java, which is why is it called JavaScript? Does anyone know? Why is the language called JavaScript?
I think back in the 1950s, Java was very popular.
That is totally right. So at the time, Java was really cool, hard to imagine now. And JavaScript was at the time called LiveScript. And they said, oh, let's call it JavaScript so it sounds like Java, even though it has nothing to do with Java. So that's just a historical accent. So you have optional semicolons. And so there's two schools of thought. Some people say semicolons, you should always put them. And then the opposing point of view is they're just clever, you should never put them. I never put them. But other people religiously put them all the time. And it is true that if you never put the semicolons, you have to be a bit well, either way, you have to be a little bit more careful. Look over here, return, because there's an end of the line, a semicolon is automatically inserted, so it'll return before it ever sees the X. And there's no syntax error because it's legal to have a statement that has no effect. Operators are the same thing. There's some primitive types that you don't usually worry about. Let's see what we do worry about. No, I don't want to do that. Okay, I'll quickly go inside this. So he's worried here about where the JavaScript gets activated, and so typically JavaScript gets you put something up in the top of the web page, and when the page gets loaded, that stuff gets executed, and you'll see by example when that happens. You can then, of course, have things that are active. So over here, let's see that. He has like a link, and when one clicks on this link, then something happens. And the code that was used here is to put the JavaScript thing right in here. That's not a thing that we'll ever do, but it can be done. Same thing here. he has a couple of examples where he puts like the script right there. We'll see how one does this much better in jQuery. But the point is that you can attach event handlers to anything that's on the web page, so to get more JavaScript kicking off. Okay, now to the more important parts of it. First of all, objects. JavaScript is an interesting language in that it has objects and no classes. And really an object is, at first blush, an object is just a hash table. So you can think of, when you make a new object, it's an empty hash table. You can add more name-value pairs in it simply by making them. Over here, say myObject.make is v6. This probably is a bottle of juice or something. You don't know what an object of what class, because there are no classes. So really an object is just a bunch of name-value pairs. You can access these name-value pairs in one of two ways, by the traditional dot notation, or if you prefer, by a more hash table-like notation with a bracket and then the key inside. In this case here, the key has to be a string. You can nest objects, well, of course. We'll see that more in a more realistic thing later. You can loop over all properties of an object, which is sometimes what you want to do to find out just what's inside, with the following loop here, where you have a variable and you say in my object, that loops over all of the keys inside the object. So again, you can, from an implementation point of view, you can think of an object as just something that has any number of attributes and whatever that particular object wants to store. Let me actually give you a quick example of an object so you see one in the wild in a situation that you care about. Let me crank this up. Here you see an object over here. This thing is, so you can actually also write an object in this anonymous way, that by just an opening and closing brace, and you put in your name value pairs inside here. So this is an object that has three properties: text, choices, and answer. And the value also of these is completely unconstrained. There's no types that you have to respect. So answer happens to be an integer, text happens to be a string, choices happens to be an array. And you just set it up like that, and there is your object. Remember, it's not an object of any class. There are no classes in JavaScript. But when you eyeball this as a programmer, you say, well, this looks like it's a question and a quiz. Okay, arrays are just kind of like you think that you can construct them. Normally, you can construct them in this literal way. You just name the things that goes into the array, and you access them in the same way that you always do with the bracket. No mystery to arrays. Functions. Functions are kind of like, well, they're not really like in Java. They're maybe like in Python or something. So notice there's no parameter types, because JavaScript is untyped, or I mean it's dynamically typed, I should say. You can pass anything to the swap function that you want. I mean, you would expect that I and j are integers and a is an array, but if you wanted to pass I and j to be two strings and a an object, and if everything else happened to go through, then that would be fine. Otherwise, you would get some kind of runtime error. And in fact, it might work, right? Suppose a was an object, a bracket I would work if I is a string, right? It would access a property. So you could actually use the swap function not just to swap two array indexes, but to swap two properties in any object. And so some people like this flexibility. You know, it's not up to us whether we like it. We have no choice. We have to use JavaScript. So here now comes the important point. That in JavaScript is a functional programming language. So if you've had CS152 and you've had a bit of functional programming in any context, you're in luck. You know all about functional programming. If not, you want to quickly figure out the basics, what you can do with JavaScript, because all of the modern JavaScript libraries use this. So if you, over here, we've defined the swap function. And now here, we're now taking the swap function, and it is a value. In a functional programming language, all functions are values. Just like the number 42 is a value in Java, the function swap is a value. When you have a value, you can do something with it. You can store it in a variable. And so what's the use? Later on, I could actually call b of 10, 5. Well, this was a really bad example. A. And because b now contains this function, then it calls the swap function. So this gets interpreted as follows. What's b? Oh, b right now contains the swap function. The parentheses mean function call. Let's call that function. Well, who cares about that? The reason you care is that when you have like a handler, like a button handler, you can make a function and then you can later pass that function to the button handler. Whereas think about how you have to do that in Java. In Java, when you make a handler, you have to make a subclass of some interface. You have to implement that method and put the code in there. You have to make an object of that subclass and then pass that object to the thing that wants to be handled in some way. In JavaScript, it's much simpler. You make a function and you pass the function on to the button. So you would say b.onClick equals some function. There's a lowercase. And so this function you could have defined somewhere else. In fact, you can even do better than that, and that's something that people do all the time. Actually, didn't put it on this slide. Okay, well that's shameful. So you can make the function anonymous. And this is, again, something that is very, very common in modern JavaScript, that this thing is a function, it has some kind of an action, and you just set that function into the spot that it belongs. In Java, you know how to do this thing. Like I just said, you would have to use an anonymous subclass of, you would make an anonymous object of an anonymous subclass. You have 2 lines of code for that. So in this case, JavaScript really is very, very nice. Just as an interesting aside, the fellow who developed JavaScript over 15 years ago, when it was still LiveScript, of course knew perfectly well all those functional languages that they bug you with in CS152, such as Lisp and Scheme. And he knew the advantage of having functions as objects in your language and how flexible it can make it. It took 7 or 8 years before the rest of the JavaScript users woke up to this. So this guy had a good education in computer science, designed this programming language, putting in features that took the more naive programmers who used at the time JavaScript for doing very simple programs. It took them a long time to find out all that stuff that's in JavaScript. And so there was a flurry of books a few years ago about the good parts in JavaScript, and that explained to people all of these really nifty features. So this fellow really was way ahead of his time. And so it shows that sometimes when people learn something in college and then later turn out to be language designers, life can be good. So that was the case with him and also with the designer of Python. On the other hand, when someone didn't go to college and didn't learn computer science and designs a programming language, the result can be bad, such as PHP. So if you've ever done any PHP and you wonder why the language is so wretched, it's because it was designed by someone who knew nothing about designing a language. So the JavaScript guy really was very, very good and kind of future-proofed the language when he built it. So then another thing that is also interesting, although that today is a little bit of a question of contention, is so he didn't want to put in classes because it was meant to be a very lightweight language. And so there's the objects don't really have classes, but they can kind of fake to be like classes. So there's a syntax that makes them appear like that, namely the new syntax. So you can define a function that does some amount of stuff, and here it uses this variable this that I'll tell you where it comes from in a minute. And then you can call that function here. So car is just a function. It's not an object, it's not a class, it's not anything. It's just a regular old function. And then when you call that function with new, then behind the scenes, the following magic happens. First, an object is created. Second, this variable in the function is bound to that object. And I guess third, that object is returned. So with this kind of syntactical trick, you get the illusion of having a constructor. Okay, so it looks like a constructor, but it isn't really. It's just a function that with this trick has been made to feel like a constructor. So you call new and then any old function. What will happen? You could call new swap. The effect will be that an object is created. Well, swap doesn't do anything with this variable, so that object stays naked, and then it gets returned. This function over here does a little bit of with this, namely it assigns make, model, and year to these three things, then it gets returned. So that is a kind of a nifty trick to give you the feel for a constructor, and you'll see that occasionally in JavaScript. And then there is a way of doing methods. And do I really want to go through this? No, because we're not doing it right now. Okay, moving on to jQuery. So this fellow John Razik, who was one of the first people who really appreciated how flexible JavaScript was, used to build this thing called jQuery that had kind of two aims. One of them is to make it really easy to get into stuff on a web page without having to do the traditional kind of DOM navigation. And the other one is to iron out some browser incompatibilities in JavaScript. Nowadays, the browser incompatibilities are nowhere near as much as they were before, and so the reason that we use jQuery is to have a much nicer way of getting at stuff. So over here, he shows the old way of doing it. So let's suppose that you had a button whose ID was yo. So what for input ID equals yo, and whatever HTML you need to make a button. And then you wanted to add its on-click handler, then you had to say document get element by ID. And not a big deal, I guess, but you do this all the time. Your code typically is littered with this kind of stuff. So in jQuery, they've done the following. Number one, every time that you want to do anything with jQuery, you use the $ variable. So there's a predefined object called $ that knows how to do stuff. Why do they call it $? It was the shortest name that was very likely to be available. Right? No one else named their variable $, and so he was the first one to do it, so he grabbed it. And it's one character. That's the only reason. Okay, so $ is an object, is a function object, so you can call it with whatever and has different effects. When you call it with a string that starts out with a hash, then that means to take an ID. If you were to call $ and with a string that starts out with, I don't even know all the shortcuts, but I've learned today, if you do this, then it creates a node that's a UL node. And so depending on what goes on inside the string, how it's formatted, there's a bunch of conventions that you quickly access the stuff that you need. Truth be told, the way I learned this stuff is by looking at sample code on Stack Overflow, and I say, oh, if it starts with a hash, it must be an ID. But you could actually read through the documentation. So over here, he has like some other way $document gets you to the document, apparently. And so the rest of it is normal, right? At this point here, we have our button, and now this part, the stuff behind here, is regular JavaScript. There's nothing special about that. Now, all of the stuff has to be done for whatever reason inside the document ready method, and I'll give you the template for that. I'm far from an expert as to exactly why and where it has to work just like that. Okay, so for the reading assignment, I'll just have you read through these slides in more detail. So in the lab, we're just going to put this to work. and I'm going to make you build a very, very simple jQuery mobile application. It's also instructive to, if you can, to look at some of these samples on your mobile phone to get an idea on how really they do kind of look like your typical mobile stuff. And I just want you to write some simple code. And I hope I'm giving you enough. Yes, I am giving you enough information to put this all together. Now, when you test it on your mobile device, it's easy enough to test it in the browser, so go ahead and do that first. But it's kind of fun to see it on your device. And then, of course, it has to be on a web server, right? Because you can't easily get the stuff that's in your computer onto your device. So Kevin, and I would like to thank him publicly for his efforts, Kevin has made it so that when in your repo, you have a directory public HTML that sits side by side with your workspace. Anything that you put on here and then push your repo, he has put in a hook that every 2 minutes he downloads everything from those public HTML directories on a web server that he set up elsewhere, namely on the machine named CS10. And then you can point your browser in your mobile device there, and then you can see how your application looks like on your mobile device. That service will be there till the end of the semester, so if there's anything at all that you need to put on a browser that, within the reasons of good taste, you can push it in the same way. Many of you will have your own web space and you won't need the service, and by all means, do whatever is more convenient for you. But I figured rather than having you go and come up with some hokey Google site or something, this is really easy. All right, so go ahead and start doing the lab, and I'll come around in a few minutes and see how it's going.